Hey, why spend Christmas Eve waiting for some extra fat white dude to come busting through the ceiling when you could spend Christmas Eve with yours truly, the super villain, Doom? I'll be hosting a whole night of holiday shows on Adult Swim, ho-ho-hoing and things of this nature. We have Grandma coming through on the strength, if she get here in a reasonable hour. We have a couple of scriptures from the good book, I believe. Oh, yeah. I'm your holiday host on Adult Swim, the super villain, Doom. Ho, ho, ho.
For as long as I can remember, there have been two things that I have always been obsessed with: superheroes and music. I grew up in a house that listened to music constantly, and when I was 10, I got my first guitar and I've been playing ever since. Music and comics are some of my favorite things, and I found that they're even better when you pair them together. I think music complements comic books incredibly well, just like how a good score can make a movie better. So today I thought I'd give a list of my 5 favorite albums to listen to while reading comics, although I did have to stop myself from making it a 20 album list. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a comment and tell me some of your favorite albums, and be sure to like and subscribe. To start us off, let's talk about Aquemini by Outkast. Aquemini was released in 1998 by Atlanta hip-hop duo Outkast. Outkast was formed in 1992 by Andre 3000 Benjamin and Antoine Big Boy Patton when they first met at Tri-Cities High School in Atlanta. They've become known for working with legendary Southern production group Organized Noise and for largely helping put Southern hip-hop into the mainstream. Outkast is one of my favorite hip-hop groups. I remember my mom listening to them a lot when I was a kid, but what really got me into them was the opening scene for Iron Fist. That show may not have been the most accurate portrayal of Danny Rand, but god damn it did he have some swag with that opening. Aquemini is my favorite Outkast album for a number of different reasons. The use of live instrumentation, the creativity in Big Boy and Andre 3000's lyrics, and of course Organized Noise's iconic production. The songs on this album really taught me how valuable lyrics are to hip-hop. This may sound dumb, but before I became a fan of Outkast, I never really listened to lyrics in any song, just the instrumental. I think that's because I'm more of a musician than lyricist at heart, but after discovering Outkast and this album specifically, my view on all music has changed, not just hip-hop. But when you're reading comics, you're not really focusing on the lyrics, you're hearing the instrumentals, and that's where Aquemini's fantastic live instrumentation and experimental beat making comes in. The beat on The Art of Storytelling Part 1 is worthy of naming Outkast one of hip-hop's greatest groups with the best beats. And then you hear Spodioti Dopalicious, Synthesizer, Rosa Parks, and I don't know how anyone couldn't consider them one of the best to ever do it. I love this album so much, and a comic that I read while listening to Aquemini was Secret Wars by Jonathan Hickman. It's an extremely otherworldly story, and I just find that it pairs really well with this otherworldly album. For my second pick, Siamese Dream by Smashing Pumpkins. Siamese Dream is my favorite album of all time. Not to geek out too much about guitar, but the sounds and the tones that they created on this album are something that I think has never been done before or since. But I am getting ahead of myself. Siamese Dream was released in 1993 by Chicago band Smashing Pumpkins. In the years since its release, the album has become known for the creative difficulties among the band at that time, and for classic alternative rock hits like Today and Cherub Rock. The album was a hit, debuting at number 10 on the Billboard 200, and I think it's one of the most quietly impactful albums of the 90s. And what I mean by that is, Siamese Dream created huge waves in both mainstream and underground music that have lasted until today. I think there's a clear through line from the release of Siamese Dream to Deftones' sound and their popularity to shoegaze becoming more mainstream and more popular in the last 10 to 15 years. Siamese Dream blended shoegaze, alternative rock, psychedelic rock, prog rock, and so much more into one album seamlessly. I love the proggy solo at the end of Hummer that transitions into Rocket's fuzzed out psychedelia. I love the juxtaposition from Spaceboy to Silver. Okay, seriously, what is that title? They were just naming songs anything in the 90s. Also, I want to say that Jimmy Chamberlin is the most underrated 90s drummer ever. Sean Kinney from Alice in Chains is amazing. Danny Carey from Tool is amazing. Dave Grohl is amazing. But in my opinion, none of them are as great as Jimmy Chamberlin. He has the technique, he has the feel, he has the emotion. He is the drive of Smashing Pumpkins. Without him, they're a different band. I could go on for hours about Siamese Dream, so I'll stop here. But one comic that goes really great with Siamese Dream is the X-Men arc Mutant Genesis, or really any of Chris Claremont's run with Jim Lee. Lee's bright, beautifully 90s art reminds me of how colorful sounding Siamese Dream is. And it's just great 90s X-Men stories that go great with a 90s album. And next, for my third album, let's talk about Faces by Mac Miller. Just to clarify, Faces is a mixtape, but I'm counting it here as an album because I listened to it a lot. Faces was recorded in 2013 and released as a free mixtape on Mother's Day in 2014, but got officially released on vinyl and streaming in 2021. This mixtape was really important for Mac and his confidence in his ability to create raw, vulnerable, and creative music. It was one of many projects Mac had made, but it was the first to be as retrospective and raw as it is. Plus, on top of that, Mac's instrumentation was out of this world on Faces. What Do You Do with Sir Michael Rocks is up there with East by Earl Sweatshirt for being easily one of the weirdest instrumentals I've ever heard on a hip-hop song. But luckily for Mac, the weirdness works here. He gets super creative on San Francisco, and Colors and Shapes is one of his best songs, right up there with 2009. It took me a long time to discover Faces, and when I finally did, I knew I had been missing out on gold for years. Going back to this mixtape being important for Mac's confidence musically, I really do want to emphasize this. If it wasn't for Faces, I don't think we would have gotten Swimming or Circles. Like I said earlier, this album taught Mac how to be vulnerable, and that vulnerability is key to what makes some of his most beloved projects so great. Faces is definitely my favorite Mac Miller project, and it complements so many books so well I couldn't pick just one. I listened to it while reading a lot of Jeff Johns' Green Lantern run, Infinity Gauntlet, and Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow. I can't give a definite pick on this album, but those books pair incredibly well with it. Rest in peace to Mac Miller. I mourn him every single day. For my fourth album, Mad Villainy by Madvillain. Shocker, white guy likes Madvillainy, but how could I make a video about comics and music and not talk about MF Doom? Madvillainy by Madvillain was released in 2004, and Madvillain is a hip-hop duo made up of rapper MF Doom and producer Madlib. Doom has become mostly known for his inspiration from comics, and if you don't know anything about him, I'm sure you can see that his whole persona is built off of Dr. Doom. And that's not just a gimmick with his name and his mask. He named his debut album Doomsday, and he sampled old Fantastic Four and Spider-Man cartoons for dialogue and instrumental samples a million times. Doom said himself that he liked Dr. Doom because he's a villain with an ego that's justified, but he's also ashamed of himself and he feels ugly. Doom found a sense of relatability in that story. But I'm getting off topic. Let's talk about the album. Madvillainy is, and I hope it's not controversial to say this, one of the best hip-hop albums of all time. From Madlib's revolutionary techniques on the instrumentals to Doom's unrelentingly pounding lyrics, this album is completely unique. All caps, Meat Grinder, Fancy Clown, America's Most Blunted, Accordion, these are all songs that display Doom and Madlib's spectacular ability to bounce off one another. Madlib has a way of making beats that mesmerize you. He loops a lot of his samples and heavily relies on rhythm to drive the song. I know this sounds obvious to say, but when you really listen to his instrumentals, he has a way of blending his drum and sample loops that just hit so hard. In the 20 years since this album was released, there has never been anything quite like it since. This album was just lightning in a bottle, two fantastic masters of their crafts coming together on a level that has only been done a handful of times. There is a lot of comics that could be read to this album, but I'll give you two picks. Fantastic Four, Full Circle, and Doctor Strange and Doctor Doom, Triumph and Torment. Honestly, the story isn't really what I read Fantastic Four, Full Circle for, even though it is a good story. I read it for Alex Ross's amazing artwork. He really dialed it up to 11 with that book. It takes all of Jack Kirby's adventures into psychedelic imagery and combines it with Ross's signature style of realism so well. And Triumph and Torment is just a great Doom story. It has everything you would want from a Doom comic: the tragedy, the magic, the wit, the intelligence, and the fact that the story is Doom and Doctor Strange going to hell together is so cool. That's rad. And now for my fifth and final album, Electric Ladyland by Jimi Hendrix. Electric Ladyland was the third and final studio album released by Jimi Hendrix when he was alive, and it's easily my personal favorite of his discography. This album was released in 1968, but it was so far ahead of its time. Highly experimental while sticking to his blues rock roots, this album just showcased Jimi at his highest level. Like I said earlier, I've been playing guitar since I was 10, and that is in large part due to Jimi Hendrix. I mean, do I even really need to say it? Jimi Hendrix is the best guitarist in modern music. People tend to think of him as overrated, he just plays pentatonic scales, blah 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 blah, but they really do not understand how much he changed the landscape of music. His influence has been felt on every generation since his peak, with artists like D'Angelo, Stevie Ray Vaughan, and Prince being among the many to be influenced by Jimi. Do you know how awesome you have to be one of Prince's main influences? Hendrix is the best guitar player of all time, and no one can change my mind. And I haven't even said anything about the album yet. This album shows Jimi's range extensively. It was extremely experimental. Jimi was one of the first artists to use a voice pitcher to pitch his voice down really low, and that's something that has become very common in hip-hop. Jimi was one of the first artists to have a song that was almost 15 minutes long, which only became more prominent in the 70s with bands like Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd. It was an album that took extreme risks for its time that we're still using today. Crosstown Traffic is an amazing pop rock song just bleeding with Jimi's signature fuzz. Voodoo Child is one of the best guitar, drumming, and organ playing sessions ever put to tape. 1983, A Merman I Should Turn to Be is an extremely visual prog psychedelic song. It feels like swimming through Atlantis while listening to it. And of course, Jimi's iconic cover of Bob Dylan's All Along the Watchtower is on this album. It's so hard for me to explain the cultural significance of that song because it's become so many things to different generations. For some, it reminds them of the Vietnam War and the fear around that time. For others, it reminds them of the scene in Watchmen where Dr. Manhattan puts a smiley face into Mars. I'm gonna stick to my guns here and say that All Along the Watchtower is the best cover song of all time. Electric Ladyland is such a larger-than-life, outlandish album that I feel is so important for modern music. But what comics do I recommend you read to this album? I only have one book, and I feel like it's the only right answer to this question. Watchmen. It's a classic book that goes great with a classic album. Zack Snyder had a true vision using Watchtower in the movie. So, those are some of my favorite albums to read comics to. I hope you enjoyed the list and go try some of these pairings. I think you'll find they're great. I highly recommend reading Watchmen while listening to Electric Ladyland. It hits like Dark Side of the Moon and Wizard of Oz. I appreciate you watching. Leave a like and make sure to subscribe so you can hear me yap about my geek stuff. And I'll see you next time.
Soda being inside of a cup. That. I'm just kidding. I won't.